Now our head isn't really complete. We have our head subassembly here, but clearly there's no head. There's just two eyeballs, and they're floating out in space. There's nothing holding them together. So we're going to need to add a bracket that will hold these two cameras in place. So let's open that head subassembly up in its own window. Again, I like to do that because keeping this tree as simple as possible is always really helpful, I find. Now let's head over here and create a new component. Let's hit S, Insert, New Part, and we'll just drop that on the front plane of our head subassembly. I'm going to rename this my bracket, and this is an internal component. Why don't we just skip all that stuff and do it right now? Let's right-click this and go ahead to Save Part and External File. Okay, so now this is already internal. Let's open this up in its own window for just a second here. And just so that we have something to look at in our assembly, let's delete that default sketch that comes in. We'll go to our front plane, create a sketch, and then I'm going to create a center slot. If you look in the sketch toolbar, you drop down your slot tools, there's a center point and straight slot tool. We've already used that once. Let's click on the origin here. We'll come out horizontally. I don't know. I'm just going to make 60 looks fine, and then make this kind of biggish. That looks good. No problem. Then we'll go back to our Features tab and do an extruded boss from that. Now we want this to come up, I don't know, like 15 millimeters. That looks fine. Hit OK. And as you know, this is all very adjustable. If I click this face, I can change it, or I can change these dimensions just by dragging them. No problem. Now I know I'm going to need holes in this thing. I don't know how big they need to be. I'm just going to throw them in there. Once again, this is all about exploration. We don't know what we're building before we build it. We're just going to make this up as we go, and the power of SOLIDWORKS is going to let us make changes to that at any time. So let's head back to that front plane and create another sketch there. I'm going to grab my circle tool and create a circle that's, I don't know, 50 millimeters, something like that. Now, if I recall, actually, well, I don't know how big this needs to be. Let's just actually delete this dimension and drag this on out. Now, I do know that I want for this circle to be concentric with this outer circle all the time. There is no case in which this will not be concentric. Now, first of all, head up here to your View menu and drop that down and make sure that sketch relations are visible. We need to be able to see those. Now, because I snapped to the center of this arc, you notice I have this little green rectangle, and if I mouse over it, it says coincident, axis of bracket, 0.2. Coincident is just a fancy word for touching. It's just a constraint that tells SOLIDWORKS that we want for the center of this circle to touch the center of this cylinder. If I delete that constraint by clicking it and hitting the delete key, then I can drag this around and the circle moves however I want to. Or, if I select the outer edge of this circle, Control-click any of these circular edges, then I get a list of other types of constraints we could put on these two items, one of them being make concentric. Click that, and now this guy is concentric. Same basic idea. So we can set this to whatever size we think looks appropriate. We'll go to our Features, do an extruded cut, and let's flip that direction and go through all. Hit OK. And now we've got a hole blasting through this bracket. And as we've done in the past, let's go up to our pattern tools, drop that down, and do a mirror operation. We're going to mirror across the right plane of our part. And under Features to Mirror, we'll just click on that Cut Extrude. Hit OK. And now this is really easy to change, right? I can select this face and change these dimensions. And because we put a coincident constraint on this circle, it's going to stay coincident no matter what we do, which is really, really nice. We can adjust this however we need to get it to look just the way that we want. So let's close this up. Yes, we'll go back to our assembly. And now this part is active, right? It's blue, which means if I drag it, it's actually going to be modeling the part rather than moving the part in the assembly. We need to exit this to edit the assembly. So this turns black again. Now we can just drag this wherever we think we want it to be. So I'm just going to drag it, I don't know, somewhere up here-ish. That looks fine. Somewhere where it looks like it's close to where we want it to be in the end. And then right-click it, Edit Part, And so I'm editing it right here in context. Now I can click any of these things. We can change those dimensions and adjust them, hopefully to be able to handle our final part. And because I didn't constrain these faces, I can actually move them. Something like that. That's looking pretty good. So this is close enough here, right? So let's create a constraint. I'm going to go to my mate. Let's mate this face to this face. Perfect. Hit OK. And also, I don't know, let's actually mate, let's do this front face to this edge, and it'll just bring those together. So those stay right where they are. Hit OK and OK to get out of the mate tool. Looking really nice. Now let's just right-click this guy, edit part, and once again, I can just grab this face and drag it in till it looks right. And I could grab this face and drag it to make this thing thicker. And that's all looking pretty good. I just drag this dimension to make this a little bit narrower. And also, I think I want these guys closer together, right? So let's drag these a little closer. Something like so. Something like that. Hit OK. And OK. Exit that part. And one other thing, we actually need to add another mate. Let's mate this surface to this one. So those will be concentric. Boom. Now we have a bracket holding these guys together. Now the whole thing is still floating in space, right? We still have two cameras floating out in space. We need to lock those down. So I'm going to recommend just going to the mate tool, drop this down. Let's grab the bracket. We'll take its origin and mate that to the origin of the head. Hit OK and OK. Now this stuff is locked down to the center. We can drag this to kind of rotate them, but that's the only degree of freedom that they have. And that is fine by me. Close this up. Yes, we want to save it. We're back to our main assembly with a bracket in place.